lot of the literature in sociology and criminal justice really attributes problems in policing to kind of individual officer level decisions, specifically officer discretion and who they stop when they make an arrest and how they treat community members. Yet roughly half of all police encounters stem from community requests for police services, which most of them are coming through the 911 system. And so in my work, I kind of zoomed out from this moment of police public encounter to include the interactions that happen before the police ever arrive at the scene. So the purpose of my research was really to shine a light on dispatch to better understand how 911 call takers kind of mediate and process caller requests. And through my research, I find that the 911 system can produce excessive, at times unjustified and racially disparate police public encounters. And I think, some of the reasons why this happens, that there are a lot of institutional constraints on people inside dispatch. So things like having limited first responder options other than being able to send the police to kind of resolve callers' problems, insufficient training, staffing shortages, and kind of this organizational culture that really prioritizes customer service. And I think that this kind of outsized focus on customer service when someone calls and asks for police services can kind of constrain the gatekeeping function that call takers are intended to be playing over this kind of large 911 system to try and prevent some of the worst excesses of the system from coming in. They're limited in how they can kind of filter calls out. And I also think this customer service focus can make it hard for call takers to sort of challenge or probe callers' requests that they find potentially problematic, especially around racially biased or racially motivated calls that we've seen in the media over and over again. I think that, some of it is about wanting to meet community needs, and police departments, they're receiving calls from people who presumably need some level of help they wouldn't be calling, and a desire to give them the help they need. But I think sometimes we prioritize a caller's need over maybe broader public needs. So especially when we think about racially biased or suspicious person calls, right? Whatever the caller is calling in about, the rule book even says, where I used to work as a call taker, like any person, incident, or vehicle that a caller finds suspicious is a suspicious person call. And so that sort of definition is extremely broad and gives a caller a lot of authority to mobilize police. I think, especially for new trainees coming in to the call center, which I was right out of training, often a caller, asks for something, there's not a lot of pushback. It's like, okay, no matter what, like, we'll send the police there. I think more senior call takers, people with more experience, they do know to kind of play this gatekeeping function better. They might, challenge the caller a little bit more. They might ask a lot of questions about the nature of the problem to get a better sense of what's really going on and pass all that information on to the police. But that wasn't really a key piece of the training that I went through as a call taker. That's something sort of you pick up over time on the job. So call takers previously, in what small amount of literature existed on them in the 80s, talked about the gatekeeping function a bit, that call takers have to decide what calls to send the police to and what not to. Through my research and experience as a call taker, I realized that's not the only function they play. They also have to make risk appraisals about kind of the level of response to send, right? So when a call comes into a call center, call takers trying to figure out what type of problem the caller is reporting. And each problem comes with a different priority level, right? So there's things like an assault and battery, which is a higher level incident, or disorderly behavior, which might be a lower level incident, but could be potentially a related problem. So trying to figure out what type of problem this is really important. And knowing that the decision you make is going to create very different levels of police response. So for example, I had a call come in about a man with a possible gun standing on a corner, but the caller really couldn't describe the gun. They weren't sure if they saw the gun. It was very hard to get information. And then you have to make a decision. Is this a person with a gun call, which sends like 7 police cars, or is this a suspicious person incident that's a much lower response? And, I was in training in that situation and did send the like highest level response to that, and was very nervous about kind of what I had initiated, this series of events. So this risk appraisal function is kind of a big piece of call taking. And part of the dissertation tried to understand if call takers process calls similarly. They process the same types of calls similarly. And so what I found is that there is variation in how call takers process kind of high priority calls. And so a call comes in randomly into the call center, and you and I might both be working at the call center, and I might be more of an alarmist call taker. I might put it in as a higher priority problem than you would have. And that then can cause the police, once they arrive at the scene, to classify the incident as a higher priority incident when they show up. And so this risk appraisal function, I think, is a key part of call taking, and the fact that there's some variation across call takers and how they carry it out suggests there's room for organizational learning in the call center, right, to try and bring call takers closer together. I understand the feeling of, it's better off just to send the police in case something bad happens. But through, my work at the center and seeing number of incidents in the media, it's not guaranteed that something bad will not happen by sending the police, right? We've seen a lot of negative outcomes from involving officers who have handcuffs and tasers and guns to deal with societal problems. And so I think figuring out kind of that risk assessment of the weighing the risks and benefits of when the police are really needed versus when they might not be the best resource is something we're all trying to figure out right now. And I think it's a big topic of conversation. Figuring out what the goals of the call center can be challenging, and something I tried to do in my dissertation research. And so I found that there were sort of some institutional goals, things that the organization really prioritized, things like officer safety and providing customer service, and fast response times. Response times are kind of a key metric that a lot of researchers and departments are focused on in terms of policing. There's an interesting older piece of literature by Herman Goldstein who talks about this bus where it would drive by people standing on the street and wave at them, but just keep going and not stop. And the reason it was doing that is because the bus driver said, hey, I got to keep to my timetable. I don't have time to stop and pick people up. And so kind of the point of this goal is that we can become so myopically focused on the internal goals of an organization that we sort of lose sight of what we're even trying to do here. And so I think that that's very appropriate when around 911 and dispatch, because we become very focused on things like response times or providing customer service and officer safety, which is really important to provide. But we become so focused on that, I think sometimes we lose sight of why the police are even going to certain calls in the first place, if the police are the right responder. And so that's something kind of I remember stumbling up against in my dissertation research, of just asking this question, like, why are the police here? Why are we sending the police to every single type of call? And sort of the automatic response from police leadership was, well, we have to send the police. Like, someone call 911, like that's what we do. And I understand what they were saying, but I still kind of deep down was wondering, but do we, like, is this the right thing to always do from a societal perspective? And so talk a little bit about these institutional goals versus community goals. And community goals kind of involve things more like, are callers getting the service that they actually need? Is the problem really being resolved by sending this responder out? Are we kind of protecting the civil rights of subjects when we send the police out, right? By prioritizing sort of the caller's needs over the subject of the call's needs, we could be really undermining civil rights. Convinced that like a caller really is asking for police. Often they don't even say like, I want the police. They just say, I have this problem, and then they get the police. So at a system level, I think that there are some challenges to kind of transforming the 911 system. So I think some things are around integrating different sectors of government with each other, right? So we have public safety, which Public safety, I think, is a term that we need to unpack a little bit and understand better what public safety even means to people, but kind of more integration between public health systems, social service provision, and law enforcement to have, if we want to provide more wraparound services to people calling for help, then we need to have multiple parts of government working together, not be siloed. I think we also need funding and funding streams to support alternative response models. Right now, we don't have a lot of 24/7 services in this country, and 911 is one of those. Police is one of those. So, when we think about, some cities might already have nonprofits in place doing some of this sort of work around mental health, homelessness, things like that, but it might not be funded up in a way or resourced up in a way that could really be a 24/7 operation right now. So figuring out how to create funding structures and have them be pretty secure and stable funding structures, so they're not like 1-year grants that at the end of that period they then expire. Things like that aren't going to be able to kind of maintain a really stable new 911 system. I think also having community buy-in, so we have community members understand what the 911 system is intended to be, when to use it, what types of services that they'll get when they call is really important. I don't think we've done a lot of research in the community spaces of understanding kind of what community needs are. And I do sometimes worry around alternative response models that all of a sudden, people are pushing to not send the police to things. And in some communities, people really do want the police, right? There's serious issues of crime and other problems, and they want police presence. So figuring out what your, as police leader, and as government leader, what your community really wants is important. And I think you have to have focus groups and interview community members and do all of that to really build a system that everyone's going to buy into. So I think inside dispatch, there's some supports that call takers and dispatchers could benefit from. A lot of centers are severely understaffed. So getting staffing levels up to, kind of the right appropriate level is important. I think providing adequate salary and training to call takers so that they feel really valued in the work that they're doing, that they're part of a system and that they're being valued. I think mental health services can be really important inside dispatch, right? Call takers are dealing with a lot of traumatic events, and you're often going from one call to the next without a lot of time to process what has just happened. And then you kind of just leave for the day and you don't really talk about kind of the incidents that you might have dealt with. And so some centers provide, things like maybe yoga for call takers, or breathing exercises, or just ways to kind of process the feelings that they might have from the job that they're going through. I think another policy suggestion or policy recommendation, going through incident types in CAD, computer-aided dispatch systems, and figuring out if there are ways to be more objective and have more criteria around what certain call types should be defined as. So especially around suspicious person calls, as I said before, really broad definitions like anything, any person, vehicle, or incident a caller finds suspicious is so broad that it's hard for a call taker to say, this isn't a police matter, or someone sitting on a curb, that's really not something we send the police to, because if a caller finds it suspicious, then the rule book technically says, police should be sent out. And so thinking about, are there criteria that could go into effect? Some call centers do have more specific criteria, especially for these types of calls, like the behavior itself has to be suspicious, just the person can't appear or look suspicious, right? To tie suspicious activity more directly to a behavior. I think it'd be really interesting to have more research around kind of the effect of policies like that on whether it actually reduces police dispatches to suspicious person calls, if it produces better outcomes, things like that. I don't think we know a lot at this point. But thinking about, are there ways to have more specific criteria is important. I also think giving call takers more responder options besides the police or fire is important, right? There's issues of homelessness, mental health, drug use, family disputes. Someone's child is being unruly. That was a call that would come in with a fair amount of frequency into call centers. And so thinking about, these are real problems and people clearly are asking for help. But again, by sending the police, we're basically criminalizing a lot of societal problems that shouldn't be criminalized. After the moment, it's important to kind of have these incident reviews where we really sit down and understand how an incident played out the way it did, and including call takers in that process. So a lot of incident reviews after the fact might focus on the police actions and the community members' actions, but not necessarily on what happened inside dispatch. And that was another area of research in the dissertation, was focusing on the arrest of Professor Henry Louis Gates outside his own home in Cambridge. And there were a series of event reviews that happened after that incident that really focused on issues of procedural justice. If the police officer had treated Professor Gates with more respect and dignity, the incident might not have escalated the way it did. I think that's probably very true, but I also found interesting the 911 call that came in and how the call taker processed that call. So the caller was very ambiguous and uncertain when they made the call about what they saw going on. It was like a potential breaking and entering into this house, but multiple times during the call, the caller said the men might live at this house. They might be locked out, might be struggling with a key, things like that. And none of that information had been passed along to the responding officer from dispatch. And I found very interesting, none of the event reviews after that incident included interviewing the call taker, interviewing dispatcher, and kind of talking to them about what they perceived this incident to be and why they behaved the way they did and the decision-making processes that they kind of went through. I have a few new research projects I'm working on. Some of them are with the policing project at NYU and with a fellow researcher here at Suffolk University to look at about 5 different police agencies across the US who are trying to implement alternative response models or make some sort of change in their current dispatch protocols and procedures, and do qualitative work around kind of what the change is, how the policy change came about, and any challenges and obstacles that call takers, I'm especially focused on the call takers, might be having kind of implementing policy changes around sending alternative responders, sending them out. And so kind of doing a deeper dive case study of different agencies, especially because my dissertation research is focused mostly just on one agency. So I think it's important to kind of understand the dynamics across different centers. And I'm also working on a paper that looks at how call takers express skepticism over the phone. And so this idea of kind of the constrained gatekeeping function that I talk a bit about in my dissertation, and Cynthia Lum wrote about recently in a paper, kind of talks about, it's hard sometimes to play this gatekeeping function. And so this new paper I'm working on, I listened to, about 150 911 audio recordings and look for strategies call takers deploy when they don't necessarily overtly gatekeep by saying, no, we're not sending the police, but do sort of other tactics to kind of try and change the trajectory of the call, such as asking, recycling the same questions back over the caller over and over again to kind of challenge what they're asking about, or long periods of silence, kind of not uptaking the caller's request as a sort of way to say, I don't know about this. So kind of detailing these different strategies to show that there's actually a lot of work call takers do over the phone to try and fulfill this gatekeeping function without overtly doing it, because policy is pretty much send the police.